Welcome back to my channel. I'm Naomi. This is Belle Stitches Pirates, and it's been a very long time since I have posted a video. I've had a couple of pretty insane life changes, and that's affected my ability even to stitch. So I had a little bit of time. I pondered the notion of doing a video versus being able to stitch, and decided to see if I could do a combination stitch with me. This is Pirates Retreat by Heaven and Earth Designs, artwork by Mary Thompson. It is being stitched 1/1 on 28 count. I think it's Witchell Coffee, something like that. It's a piece of fabric I got off of Amazon early on in my cross stitch journey. When I do 1/1, I do not like to finish on the back if I can avoid it. I just like flipping the piece around. So I tend to use, I don't know if this is a traditional true loop start, since it's one thread, but I've found this modified method works well. Works better if you can find the hole. And then once I have gotten a couple stitches in, I just clip the tail really close. So in the intervening, goodness, I don't even know how many months, probably close to 6 or more, since I have filmed a floss tube, what have I been doing? Well, in January, I took a new position as business agent for my union, and I have been busy both training people for my old position, if you will, modernizing some of the practices. My predecessor pretty much did everything on paper, and minimal in digital form. And what she did do in digital, she had very strange naming conventions. So finding things is very difficult. We moved our office location a couple of miles down the road. It's a much nicer location. And then every single month since June, I have had a trip of some kind. So in June, my family, extended family, we all went on a cruise together. And that was really cool. It was the first cruise for a bunch of us. It was 10 of us total. And of the 10, 7 of us had never gone on a cruise before. And so that was quite fun. We had a really good time. And it was nice because I was able to unplug from work. Work is a 24/7 job. It's bad enough that I end up much of the time giving out my work number if I need somebody to get a hold of me, because my personal phone I hardly touch during the day, and by the time the evening happens, I'm exhausted, don't want to deal with it. But because I am on call all the time and emergencies can happen basically at any time of the day or night, it means that I have to be attuned to my personal or my work phone. So my personal phone gets ignored quite often, to the point that I might not even see a text message for a couple of days. Or I'll see it come through and something will happen with work, and the next thing I know, I've completely forgotten about it until I happen to be in my text messages on my personal phone a different day, and then I get the reminder. So June was family vacation, which was a cruise to Alaska. We had a really great time. July, we moved the office, and then at the tail end of July, about 5 weeks was it 5 weeks? 4 or 5 weeks after we got back from the cruise, I had a business trip to Chicago, and while there, managed to get a 2nd-degree sunburn. That was oodles and boodles of not fun. I grew up in the Midwest. I remember getting many a lecture growing up as to the dangers of sun, fair skin, and water. Did I remember that 20 years after I left? No. I mean, subconsciously I remembered. I took the sunscreen. Did I put it in my bag for the day? No. Did I choose to go on an architectural cruise at 3 o'clock in the afternoon when the sun is at its strongest on the water? Yes. I thought I'd gotten a little bit of sun on my arm. 4 days later, I had blisters and extreme pain from the burn on my chest. It was not fun. I had a mammogram scheduled for about a week after I returned. That got canceled and rescheduled because there was no way I was going to be able to tolerate that exam with severe sunburn. So, yes, I proceeded to reschedule that. I now get teased massively by the family every time it's a sunny day and we're doing an outside activity because did I pack the sunscreen? Is the general question. So yes, it'll be a long while before I live that one down. Then for Labor Day, I got back on the 5th of August, went into contract negotiations. August was a bit crazy. We had shows that were having a lot of extra needs due to a variety of reasons, but we've had an uptick in COVID, and so between COVID and people having mental health crises, and a variety of other things happening, I had 2 shows in particular that it seemed like every day, every other day, they were calling me with an emergency request for somebody to come in and do work. It made for a really crazy busy season, or crazy busy month. One of the things that I do every month normally is I do a newsletter letting people know things like upcoming negotiations, upcoming trainings, if there's something going on with, well, one of the things that's been affecting some, if not all, of our members in some capacity is the WGA and SAG-AFTRA strikes. Live theater is the bulk of our work, but we also do film and TV and commercials. So when the actors and the writers are on strike, it can affect our work down the line. So we, dealing with trying to get members into alternative employment streams, get people trained on various things. And then with the constant need for last minute help on a couple of shows, by the time August ended, I did not have my newsletter done. I went on vacation. Well, it wasn't really a vacation, it was a working vacation. I went to visit my grandparents for Labor Day, introduced them to my husband, whom they hadn't met yet. And we had a really great visit. I ended up working during the visit because my vacation cover got ill right before I left, and there was no way I was going to ask them to work sick, so I just took the phone with me. And there were some days where I was like, okay guys, I've got to work before we go have fun. and I would sit down and I would do work, and then once my work was done, I just, hang out with the family, or we'd go visit a sightseeing place, or, go out to dinner, what have you. But, yeah, really, my grandparents got to see a little bit of the crazy that is my life at times. And during it all, we had a really great time, just visiting and seeing each other. It's been a number of years since I saw my grandparents. So that was good. And then my husband's been in background for a new job, so waiting on that to determine kind of some of the other things that are gonna possibly change in our life. It's making planning things a little bit difficult because new job means new rules and procedures for taking time off. He's used to being able to simply call up a day or two before and say, hey, you know what? I decided I'm taking a long weekend this weekend. And not having any kind of grief given to him over it because he's got a bajillion vacation hours and so much seniority that they just are like, you want the day off? You want the weekend off? Okay. So, some changes there. It's not easy being the new kid on the block. I'm really enjoying the work. Certain things that I was maybe nervous or uncertain about have been have just really not been an issue. And then, I've discovered that there are some things that I struggle with. I really struggle with boundaries. It's, people call and they're like, hey, is it a problem? And I was like, yeah, I can talk. And 3 hours later, it's, we're not just resolving the issues. So, learning to set boundaries of this is my personal time. This is not an emergency. They can wait. And then just scheduling a follow-up call to go over the issue, So very quickly learning, what the issue is and saying, okay, I'll talk to you on such and such day, and then putting it in the calendar so that I actually do call them back on that day. And learning that the world's not going to collapse if I wait to respond back to them for a non-emergency item. And just really evaluating what those items are. Also learning to identify times where I can fall back on my relief dispatcher. Good example of that is we had a friend getting married, and I hadn't even thought about the fact that I should probably schedule the relief dispatcher until 2 days before, when I was thinking about the fact that, having looked at where the location was, realizing, oh, I might not have very good service because it's way out in the country. And additionally, do I really want to try to go to a wedding and also be on call? No. So I called the relief dispatcher 2 days before and said, hey, do you mind taking the phone for the weekend? And sure enough, we had crises and they dealt with them and took care of them. But it was so nice, and it was another little lesson of remembering, hey, I can schedule some additional personal time off, take a weekend every so often. I'd taken advantage of having the relief dispatcher when I was doing negotiations and had negotiations scheduled for really long days and also needed to fill some jobs. And those particular days where, I gave the phone to the dispatcher so that they could deal with filling shows while I dealt with negotiating the contract terms for one of our employers. And, instead of a split focus, being able to dedicate 100% of my focus to that contract, that seemed like a no-brainer. But for some reason, planning ahead and taking the weekend so that I could give 100% of my attention to my friend's wedding didn't cross my mind until the 11th hour. And, fortunately, I have a really good dispatcher who was like, sure, that's no problem. And was able to do that for me. But it's just learning to put those boundaries in and say, hey, yeah, my husband and I were going to do this, or, I'm going to pass off the phone for weekend XYZ so that they, I can focus on my husband and, whatever the event is that, or, special time that we're celebrating. Being mindful and present is, it's something that I keep, I wouldn't say harping on with my members, but I encourage them to be aware and mindful of their mental health triggers. And those are things that I also need to keep in mind and be aware of. I, practice what I preach, basically. So, learning how to balance. I find stitching and crafting to be very therapeutic and relaxing. So making sure that even though, yes, there's always more to do than I have really have time for. That does not mean that I shouldn't take time to do things like pausing to, stitch, or getting up and taking a walk, a stretch. So those are things that I'm having to learn. I'm also juggling putting therapy into my day or my weeks, because I think part of it was the stress and challenges of taking on a new job and trying to, it's a lot to take on. There are not enough hours in the day to do the job. And so that makes it more difficult to balance your stress and manage your stress. And so for me, one of the things that I have had to do is be mindful of how I'm feeling. And I was starting to find myself feeling just like I was going to drop some, I was gonna fail to do something critical and cause problems for people that are counting on me to do my job. And I had been listening to a variety of legal commentary shows on YouTube, and there was a lot of discussion about ADHD and how it affects people or impacts their life, causes, challenges in their life. And, I kept hearing it and kept going, that sounds a little bit like something I'm struggling with. And I really was like, okay, I'm not willing to self-diagnose, because I just think that that's a recipe for failure. So I contacted my doctor and said, here's the things that I'm struggling with. Here's what people who have been diagnosed with ADHD are saying are some of their struggles. And these sound eerily familiar. Do I go through you to get evaluated for ADHD, or do I contact, do I schedule that straight with the psychology department? And she's like, I'll refer you. So she referred me for an ADHD evaluation. And the first thing they told me was, we're going to do a bunch of questionnaires and what have you. And some of the questions are meant to tease out, if this isn't ADHD, what other things could it be? And I was like, okay, that's fine. I'd prefer to have an answer rather than just, it's not ADHD. And they were like, we'll be looking for things like depression, bipolar, autism indicators, things that'll tell us if we need to investigate something else further. And I was like, that's fine, that's great. I don't want to self-diagnose, and I don't want to take on something that isn't what's going on. Like, or just say, it's not ADHD, let's not pursue it further. I didn't want to do that either. So went through the process, and it came back at the end of the process. They were like, so it's not ADHD, but you have moderate depression. And I said, but don't really feel like I'm chronically sad. Anytime that I've felt like what I would term depressed, there's been a legitimate reason why I should be experiencing sadness, or depression. And they were like, well, but what about this? I'm like, yeah, check, and check. And they were like, yeah, you have moderate depression. So, I've started medication, with the hope that between medication and therapy and coping, like skills and tools, strategies to cope, that medication will get to me to a point where I can more easily recognize when I am having more of a depressive state, and kind of on the similar premise to my breathing issue that I have, where it's not asthma, they call it a functional restriction. And they put me on a daily asthma treatment, which basically helps my lungs to expand, which is what they aren't doing. And so before, when I would have difficulty breathing, I wouldn't use the inhaler because my difficulty breathing was more short term. And it was just more that my lungs ached, my ribs ached even. And for me, that was not enough of a clue that there was an actual breathing issue, that maybe I needed to use a rescue inhaler, because I didn't feel like I was deprived of oxygen. I just ached. And so then I got, they finally identified that as why I was struggling with going up and down stairs, or climbing, not so much down, but definitely up, climbing hills or mountains, anything that was an incline, was challenging for me. It would leave me winded, and then, a few minutes later I'd be fine. Whereas, an asthma attack, you pretty much need assistance to get back to, I didn't do that right. It's the wrong spot. And so by going on the daily regimen where I got that breathing assistance, I got to a point where I knew what breathing should be like. And so when I do have an issue where my lungs start hurting, it's time to use the rescue inhaler, because that's kind of my body's way of telling me that it's struggling more today to actually do its breathing. And so that's the hope with the depression medication, is that I get to a point where I can wean myself off of it, but I will be able to recognize when I'm having struggles and need to maybe go back on medication for a little bit to help, or even just give myself extra grace, because I'm having, I'm experiencing something, that is affecting my coping skills, my life skills. I don't know that I'm making any sense. I mean, who knows if this will even be a video that will end up getting uploaded. But those are some of the things that have been going on in my life. In other news, my nephew got his permit, and about a month or so later, I got the Facebook reminder that I graduated from college 17 years ago when he was an infant. I didn't realize it'd been that long since I'd been out of college. Like, I knew it'd been a while. I had that vague awareness that, like, I remember he was born before I graduated, but I hadn't put his age together with my graduation in like a conscious sense. And so realizing that my degree is basically as old as my nephew was a little bit jarring. So yeah, that was a funny instance. Just from the standpoint of college degrees really shouldn't be old enough to drive, but mine is. Well, I mean, one would hope that they age with time, but just, it doesn't feel like it's been 17 years since I graduated from college. I don't know why it doesn't feel that long, considering that I went to school on the East Coast and I've been on the West Coast for 12 years, something like that. No, longer than that. Moved out here in 2008. 15 years I've been out on the West Coast. It's just, it's mind-boggling how quickly time flies. I certainly would not have thought that when I got out here, I would end up eventually being the business agent for my union, responsible for many people's livelihoods and well-being. It wasn't something that was on my radar. And so, you know, it is one of those things where, nope, want to go the other way. I tend to go, if you haven't noticed, I tend to go in kind of a zigzag back and forth manner. But I also will look at, like, where's the next row going, and if I've got kind of a choice between going left or going right, I will err. Sorry. Noisy intersection. That has not changed yet. Although that is the top of the wish list for when we move, is that we're on a quiet cul-de-sac instead of a busy intersection. One would think, being across from an elementary school and next to a four-way stop, that we wouldn't have issues. Apparently the stop sign is optional and merely a suggestion. We've had accidents out front. Had a car end up in our yard. It was originally parked in front of our yard, and somebody was driving recklessly, came around the corner through the intersection, hit the car. The car ended up on my front yard. Yeah. And the car that hit it ended up blocking my driveway. So that was oodles and boodles of fun. I'm stitching this. I think I'm on like my fifth method of stitching, and who knows, I may choose a different method at some other point. But at the moment, I'm doing kind of a modified Royal Rose page by page bit of a finish. My Q snap, this is just, well, like right around in here is the center mark for the height. So, and then I'm fairly close to the center. So I'm getting close to the 25% zone, completion zone. And I'm really enjoying seeing not just giant sections of one color. I tried going all the way across with Royal Rose. But I got very aggravated very quickly because the top section. Up here is like, I don't know, half a dozen colors. And so I got really bored with it really fast. It was just a little too tedious and monotonous. So, what I've ended up doing is I'm still doing the 10 by 20 in theory. So still going 10 across in my stitching section. But basically doing the entire 10 stitch column all the way down to my finish or my stopping zone. So basically, once I get all the way across, I'll be at the halfway point, and then I'll be, finishing it up when I go across the bottom. I'm finding that just a little bit more satisfying, because I still am ending up in kind of little blocks. So like this is ending up being a little bit of a block, the water section, and then this is being a bit of a block because it's a lot of greens, and then you've got a lot of pale with a few birds. 1, 2, 3, 4. Make sure that went in the right spot. I am using Pattern Keeper. I have a Kindle Fire that I got off of eBay, and all it gets used for is Pattern Keeper. Like if I could take the extra stuff off, I would, because that's all it's used for. When it comes to threads that are ending a section like these, basically I go 12 stitches over from the edge of my 10 stitch row, come up, go down 2 for 2 over, and then come up 1. And then it gives me a guide for which of my parked threads I'm going to be using. And B, it means that I don't have to fight with threads that I have done the waist. It's not a waist stitch, but prepped for the waist finish. And I know when my stitches have gotten to the we go. When my stitches have gotten close to there, that enough of it's going to be covered over that I can then pull that up, and this one can be clipped away before I start working on this next section. Because it's got at least 10 stitches covering it, sometimes a little bit more. It helps make it rather a clean. Oh, that one, apparently I got a knot in it right before I finished it off. And then I go through and I put the, kind of tidy up my threads before I start using them. And it looks like all of those. So now what I'm going to do is I am going to work my way work all my parked threads in the next 10 by 10 spot, but I'm going to work them from the bottom to up to the top. So this one's actually the next column. So I'm going to tuck it out of the way. And then this is the next one that I have parked. And what this does is it basically lets me get all these parked threads from one column, one, two, into either another column or down in the next section, or if I determine that there's nothing close by for me to park it in, then I can put it as I can prep it as a waist thread. And then when I get all my parked threads dealt with, then I will actually have both a significant chunk stitched of the column, but also very defined remaining stitches. And ninja stitches are kind of the most annoying or challenging of this method, because you do end up stitching a handful of, you know, 1 or 2 stitches, and then you're like, okay, now let's go and stitch a totally different thread. And so, you know, ninja stitches, it's like a lot of starting and stopping. But once you get past those, then it's not so crazy. So one of the things that I will often do is, if I have a stitch where it's trying to slide underneath the weave, I do a couple of things. First, you'll see me push the stitch back, you know, kind of basically loosen up the stitch before it gets completely crossed, so that the coverage still exists. And then the other thing that I will do is I will go over the bottom leg a second time, which basically locks the warp and the weft threads together, so that the stitches can't slide. Most often I do the first one, which is just to kind of push it with my needle to loosen it up. And then, you know, go gentle on the tension when I'm crossing it. I do tend to stitch pretty tight. But then if I have to travel a distance, especially traveling a distance of, you know, multiple, even like 4 or 5 stitches, sometimes that's enough to put just enough pressure to pull that bottom leg out of alignment. And that, you know, can be rather annoying. And so oftentimes for that, what I'll do is, you know, I'll do the 2 bottom legs and then cross it once with the top leg. And that's enough to keep the tension from pulling that bottom leg under the threads and making the stitch look misshapen. My thread's trying to run away. Okay, so that is the last of that for that block. I'm also at the edge of a 10 block, so I'm gonna go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That's the edge of my next block. 1, 2, down 2, up 1, and then clip it to about an inch long. And doing the up and down there, it helps me differentiate between parked threads and waist threads, but it also helps hold this tension pretty tight, or at least snug, so that if you catch the carry on the back, you're not really pulling it completely out of its proper position. So I'm going to continue stitching, but wrap this video here, and then do a quick check to make sure I was actually in frame and upload it. This was a spur of the moment. Let me see if I can even do a setup where I can stitch. So I think that I can, which means that I can basically have this positioned and start, making notes on what it is that I want to talk about, have more of a defined discussion point, and maybe do more frequent stitch with me's, where you're not getting 6 or 9 months of rambly information. Let me know if there are topics or techniques or things that you would like me to demonstrate or discuss. And I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Have a good evening. Bye.